I'm on my phone on this, so I don't always see the text as well. They're not on the screens or the is that what you call them, the chat? So let me.
I can help monitor that for you, John. So.
Okay, I guess I could just leave it on the chat actually and watch that. Yeah, if you see someone, Crystal, who wants in or has something, let's go ahead and do that. So okay, so Amanda, you want to go ahead and do the roll call?
Sure. So on that note, I wanted to say Jenna put in the chat that Mindy Millhouse, one of the licensees, should be calling in. So.
Okay, good.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Miss Kennedy?
Here.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Miss Salatel?
Here.
Miss Quinn Davidson?
Here.
So the chairs, you have a quorum for this, and for other members, Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Perez Verdia? Miss Allard?
Here.
Miss LaFrance? Okay, chairs, you have a quorum.
All right, thank you. So we've got the agenda in front of us. Any changes to that? I see a chat from Pete Peterson. He says he doesn't hear anything. So Pete is here. Halfway here. Pete, did you get it working? Can someone contact Pete? Maybe help him get. He's going to try again. Okay. Okay. So no changes to the agenda.
This is Drew Kaysen. I was wondering, where is the agenda posted? Is it possible to find?
Through the chair, this is Mandy Honest with the clerk's office. So the agenda is posted online. I'll send the link in an email, but if you go to the Community and Economic Development webpage on the municipal website, the handouts and the agenda will be posted there. So it'll be under the assembly and committees.
And Drew, if you are on Teams and can read the chat, Ms. Weltzing posted a link. Okay, so no changes to the agenda. So in new business, we have first item is a quarterly update from Alaska Sense. And we got an email from Rich Fern at Code Enforcement, and his comment was there are no documents since there have not been any new infractions at the Tudor location. Any comments on that from the committee?
Mr. Chair.
Chris?
Yeah, I just would like to note that this is the second quarter, not second quarter in a row, but second quarter since we started this that they have no violations. So it's good to note.
Okay, yeah. Anything else? Okay, moving on to B, we have two related marijuana licenses, retail and a cultivation. Is Mr. Yell there?
Yes, I'm here, John.
Okay. Okay. So let's. I guess we can just go and handle these separately, like we typically do, even though they're connected. So, Mandy, do you want to go ahead and tell us about the licensing on the red light district retail?
Sure. So this is AKGLD2 LLC. So this is also owners of the Green Light District and Fuzzy Monkey. This is two new licenses for them. For the retail license, all of the general licensing conditions were addressed in their operating plan. They didn't have any taxes, fees, or fines found due. All of their safety and security requirements were also addressed in their operating plan. Each license, it's going to be in the same facility, but each license has its own designated premises, so there's no overlapping. So for the retail, all of the retail specific license conditions were addressed in their operating plan as well. And there were no extra conditions recommended for the retail license.
All right, thank you. Any comments from the committee? Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Ryan, like, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, was that a comment?
Mr. Constant here.
Go ahead.
I was trying to understand how the operation is going to work with dual licenses in the same building. So if there's someone that can speak to how that's set to work.
So Jana Weltzine, attorney for the Red Light District. Also on the phone is Jamie and Mindy Millhouse. Their phone number ends in 4974, so I see them on the list. So Jamie and Mindy, feel free to jump in. So the licenses are going to be completely separate, locked doors that separate them. So the retail will be downstairs, and then the cultivation will be upstairs, but it will also be downstairs. But we're going to change, because we have to change the layout through a modification later on. Because they're not going to be doing on-site consumption anymore. You might have seen on there that there was an indication for on-site consumption, but that's not going to be moving forward anymore. They're going to change that area into cultivation, but that's going to be a major modification that you'll see again. Once we get approved here, we're going to start that process. Jamie and Mindy, do you have anything else to add? You're, again, 4974, so I don't know if somebody has to unmute you or you can unmute yourself.
Actually, let's wait a moment on
Okay.
this, Ms. Weltzine. Chris, can that wait? We'll let Ryan go with his report, and then we can jump in on that again.
Yeah, that's fine. I just can't quite
Sure.
wrap my mind around it. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead, Ryan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a request for a special land use permit for a marijuana retail sales establishment within a B3 district. And this site is located northwest of the intersection of East Northern Lights Boulevard and Eagle Street. The proposed establishment will be located within an existing commercially designed structure, which is the former Trendsetters. The licensed premises area will be approximately 695 square feet for the retail. And this establishment will be operating 7 days a week from 8 a.m. until midnight. The attached and co-located marijuana cultivation facility, which is being heard through case 2020-0074, will be operating in conjunction with this retail establishment. Additionally, there is a separate marijuana retail sales establishment, which is Alaska's Green Light District, and that was approved through case 2017-0027 and Assembly Resolution 2017-145, which is going to be located on the same lot and under the same ownership. The use is consistent with the Anchorage 2040 land use plan, and the provided site plan does not show any major alterations of the building facade or structure that make it of dissimilar character, scale, or size when compared to surrounding structures. And the planning department does recommend approval of the special land use permit, subject to the conditions as stated in the staff report and the draft assembly resolution. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Can I just check, Pete Peterson, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. Okay, so for the record, Assemblyman Peterson has joined us. And okay, thank you. Any questions for Ryan?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, Constant.
Go ahead, Chris.
This may be an opportunity to get my previous question answered. I think I understand now. There are two buildings on the lot. One is the Green Light, and then this is the building that's in the back, the larger building. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, that clarifies for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions on this? Okay, sorry, was that someone? Let's see here. Okay, I have a question. So there was a comment that the site plans don't match, Ryan. Did that get squared up? I think Ms. Weltzine had commented briefly on the site.
Through the chair, that's correct. That was an advisory comment that we had added to the staff report, just due to a small discrepancy between what was submitted to the state and what was submitted to the municipality. So if there's any modifications that need to be done, the applicant is just advised to resolve that matter with AMCO.
Okay. And then was there an MOU with the Midtown Community Council?
Through the chair, I believe there was an MOU included in the application. I'm not sure if they were able to get an MOU or if they got a community engagement report. So let me check on that real quick. It was just a community engagement report. And I don't think that that's necessarily in any way a fault of the applicant to not get an MOU. I think it's just due to the fact that the Midtown Community Council is not meeting in person, and they may not have those documents in front of them or be willing to vote on those such matters.
Okay. Can I ask Ms. Weltzing or the Millhouses, have you been to the Community Council and talked to them? I saw the community meeting, no one showed up. I see if you have contact with them.
We definitely send them notice of this. They also got the complete notification. Generally, the Midtown Community Council says, they don't usually have a comment on it unless there's something that sticks out to them. So we didn't get any feedback from them. The meeting happened in December, so I don't think they were, I believe it happened in December. I don't think they were meeting at that point, so that's why we didn't go to that community council and do the presentation there. Also, this is a big facility and it's a well-known building in the area, so we kind of thought it'd be nice for community members to come to the building, so we could tour them around and show, the layout and what Jamie and Mindy are thinking. And no one showed up though, so that's the extent of our engagement with them. Mindy and Jamie, do you have anything to add? I know you sometimes go to the community council meetings when they have them. So they're here. I just don't know if you have to unmute them or if they have to unmute themselves.
Through the chair, they can unmute themselves. I can't unmute them. If you hit *6 on your phone, it'll unmute you.
Oh, okay. There we go. You guys there?
Yes, we're here.
Okay, if you have any comments, if you've been able to track, just discuss your relationship with the Midtown Community Council if you've met with them, and please state your name before you speak.
James Millhouse. Yes, we did go to the community council. They canceled it, and then I think 2 weeks later they rescheduled us. When we went back there, we had no protest.
Okay, when was that?
It's in December.
Oh, you went to their meeting in December?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So from the committee, any questions or comments?
I guess my comment would be, Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Constant.
Oh, do you want to get that? Did we cover that well enough, or? Chris?
Can you hear me?
Okay, is there a motion for an action on it or a recommendation?
Move to recommend. This is Pete.
Got a second? Oh, Chris, no, I heard you slightly. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with the sound system here. My question is just more of a philosophical question to the applicants. They appear to own both of these licenses. Is that a correct statement? The green light and the red light, or trying to get the red light?
Yes.
Yes.
And so what's the business case for having two retail establishments right next to each other owned by the same entity? This has nothing to do with the license, but I just want to know.
We just want to expand. We can't keep up with the demand. We have a little grow too. We just can't keep up with that. So we know something's going to have to give here. We'll see which one it is.
I see.
And the front one.
Gotcha. Thank you. And
Thanks.
so if there wasn't a second, I second that.
Okay. So we have a motion and second to recommend approval of this license at our next meeting on the 23rd. Is there any opposition? Or should we do a roll call vote, Mandy? Is that?
You can do it either way. If you'd like me to go down the list, I can do that. If you would like to do the opposition, if anybody speaks out, we can do it that way, whichever you prefer.
Okay. Any opposition? Okay, hearing none, we'll have a recommendation for approval on this one. So the next one is the red light district cultivation. Mandy, you want to run through that?
Yes. So this is the red light district for the cultivation. It's in the same building, so for their general licensing conditions that covered this license as well. So all of their general licensing conditions were addressed in the operating plan. The cultivation specific license conditions were also addressed in that operating plan. And similarly, there were no extra conditions recommended for the license.
All right, thank you. Ryan?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I can be very brief with this one as well. So the cultivation establishment will be located within the same building as the retail. Approximately 6,894 square feet of interior space will be dedicated to cultivation operations. And anticipated hours of operation is 8 a.m. until midnight. No additional conditions added to the cultivation other than the standard odor monitoring, and as well as resolving the parking and access agreement, and also providing final parking calculations to the traffic department. There were just some discrepancies in the square footages of each use that were submitted with the plan set with the application. So with that, I have no further comments on this case, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the committee? Okay.
John, this is Austin. It looks like Chris was trying to talk. Chris, are you unable to get in?
No, John got that on the previous item.
Okay, sorry about that.
Well, that's fine. Thanks, Austin. Appreciate that.
John,
Sorry, who was that?
this is Crystal.
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks. I just had a kind of a general question. Jana had said something a little bit earlier that kind of piqued my interest and I almost forgot about it. But the comment was made that they were restructuring a bit of their floor space because they were not going to have the on-site consumption component. And I just wondered if the owners would comment on the thoughts that led to that decision. Thanks.
Yeah, this is James Millhouse. We did that because it failed, and we're growers. We're going to put a restaurant in there, kind of a theme, and we just kind of backed out of it. It failed, and we don't know how to cook like that.
Okay, I appreciate that. So it wasn't really something to do with the COVID thing. It was just more of a lack of demand.
It failed. It didn't pass. So we decided we're not going to wait around. We're growers. Let's utilize our space. Well, we know what to do. What to do.
So
Okay, I'm sorry.
Jamie,
Okay, you were talking about the smoking component. Okay, got it. Understand. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anything else from the committee or others?
I would just make the same recommendation as the last license application. So I'd move to send a recommendation to the full body to approve this.
Second.
Okay, got a motion and second. Any opposition to that? Okay, so we'll make note at that meeting that we recommended approval. And to the Millhouses and Ms. Weltzing, I think you're aware. So as a committee, we'll say that we discussed it and offered a recommendation, but at the Tuesday meeting, it'll go to a decision of the full body. And this is just a recommendation. So I hope you'll be able to participate. The chambers are somewhat open, but you can also participate over the phone, similar to what we're doing right now. Okay, so moving on in the agenda. So we'll go to item C, which is ordinance 2020-56 to amend Title 21 to change the use specific standards for land reclamation. Do we have someone to talk about that?
Hi, Mr. Welton. This is Michelle McNulty, the planning director. I can speak to this. I also have Dave Whitfield, and I believe someone from Building Services is also on the line to help answer questions. To do a quick overview, let me pull this up. So this is a, sorry. This is an ordinance to amend Anchorage Municipal Code 2105060E, 2105010E, and the Table of Allowed Uses, Table 2105-1, to change the use-specific standards for land reclamation to remove the requirement for an administrative site plan review for projects between 5,000 and 50,000 cubic yards of fill, and require a conditional use approval for projects with operations at a scale of 50,000 cubic yards or more. This requirement for the administrative site plan review is a new requirement with current Title 21. It was created because through the fill and grade permit process, which is required for anything at 5,000 cubic yards or more, planning wasn't having an opportunity to review that. And so this additional process was put into code. Over the last several years, as this has been in place, it's been really determined that this is a redundant approval process. It adds about 45 days to someone being able to pull a permit to start an actual project. And so it's also created a situation for possible loophole that someone comes in and says, oh, I have 70,000 cubic yards, but I'm going to be finished with my project within a year. And under this provision, they would be allowed just to go through the administrative site plan. However, if they did not finish within a year, there really isn't a solid mechanism in place for us to track those and make sure that they don't come back for the conditional use permit. In addition, that's quite a lengthy process, so they should be doing that at the front end. So this was determined to be redundant. We are able to just work with the fill and grade process and have a review at that point, which really the planning component that was additional than what is already being reviewed under the fill and grade is just really looking at the offsite neighboring impacts. And so we can just provide that comment at the fill and grade permit time. And then when a project requires 50,000 cubic yards or greater, they'll come in for a conditional use permit. And this is actually just as it was under old Title 21. And
Okay.
that's what I have.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Okay, I had a couple. So what's the magic in a 50,000 cubic yard threshold?
There's been several legal cases that have spoke to that volume. Just kind of at that threshold, there's a certain amount of truck traffic associated with moving that volume, where it's kind of, that's the magic number. You have to have some number, and that's the one where it gets to the threshold of having offsite impacts, perceived offsite impacts. And Dave, Dave Whitfield, if you have anything to add to that, please jump in.
Yeah, Mr. Whittleton, this is Dave Whitfield. I would echo what Michelle said. There's been a number of legal cases in the past dating back to the early 80s that established 50,000 cubic yards as the threshold. And so we believe that by passing this ordinance and reverting back to essentially what the old code, old Title 21 required with respect to a conditional use at 50,000 cubic yards, it's an appropriate change.
Okay, how many truckloads is 50,000 cubic yards? When you have those side dumps, for example.
Hi, this is Bob Dole, Development Services Director and Building Official. May I answer that through the chair?
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Bull.
Through the smaller trucks, you're looking at 10 to 14 yards per truckload, so of the traditional style. So you'd be looking at, in change there, about 500 dump truckloads at that 50,000 worst case. As you get to the bigger side ones, you can basically increase that capacity by 2 to 2.5 times. I don't believe the side dumping ones were at the time they did this, however.
Interesting. Okay. So I think the concern that I've heard about this is, we have, particularly on the hillside, there's limits on how much you can fill. And grade and fill, I guess. Would this change any of those requirements?
So from a Title 21 standpoint, no. I think that's probably more of a building safety Bob Dole question.
Through the chair, this is Bob Dole, Development Services Director. It would not change because the process is the same in terms of the zoning review, the structural review, and for that matter, stormwater and right-of-way. So you're limited based on how deep you can go, or and the grade of the slope and structural things. So there's and in order to meet the standards to issue a land use permit, you have to show compliance with Title 23. So there's absolutely no change in the amount of fill permissible on a site or the way it's distributed on a site.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gates?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a couple of questions. The first one was, I see that the AIM says there's really no economic effects, but it does sound like it will save a lot of staff time, to avoid that redundancy that Ms. McNulty mentioned, and also that I guess developers would have less of a burden since they're removing this administrative site plan review process. And I guess I wondered, since this was put in place with new Title 21, how many administrative site plan reviews have we had for land reclamation? And I don't know if we're able to say the number between 5,000 and 49,999 cubic yards, but it would be helpful to know how many we're talking about, I think.
Dave?
Through the chair, Mr. Gates, I'd be happy to answer that question. I don't have an exact number, but what I would guess, just because my office is the one that reviews and makes decisions on these applications, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12, since the new code required the administrative site plan review for this. I would also add that there's not a major economic impact to this ordinance. However, you're correct. It does save on staff time, as well as the time and cost of borne by the developer in terms of submitting the application and being delayed in their permitting process. So.
Thank you. Did you say that about 10 to 12 of those since, is that 2014 when the requirement was put in place?
2015, yes, and about 10 to 12.
Oh, yes. All right. 2015. Thank you. And I have a couple other questions, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Go ahead, Dean.
Yeah. So with this change, would, I guess, the field projects under 50,000 cubic yards, it would just be by right. They could just start doing it without any application or process.
From title, this is Michelle McNulty. They would still, if it's 5,000 cubic yards or greater, they would still be required to get a fill and grade permit. But yes, from a Title 21 perspective, anything up to 50,000 cubic yards would be by right.
This is the building official, Bob Dole. Can I
Now that sounds
supplement
like a
that?
silly question. Thank you. So, so my last question I had was, I see this is amending table 21051, but should this also be amending, I don't know if we have it in there, I haven't checked, but the Girdwood chapter 2109 and the Chugach Eagle River chapter 2110? Do we need a similar amendment to those tables?
Through the chair, Mr. Gates, Dave Whitfield, the omission of amending both Girdwood and Chugach Eagle River was intentional. We opted not to touch those two respective chapters, and that we wanted to only deal with Anchorage at this time.
Oh, thank you. Does that mean in Chugach Eagle River and Girdwood, they would still need to get administrative site plan review for the 5,000 to 49,999?
Through the chair, I believe both Eagle River and Chugach codes point back to Chapter 5 with respect to the permitting requirements. So I'd have to go back and verify that there's no tables that require administrative site plan review in each one of those respective chapters. But I believe the answer to your question is no, because both Chapter 9 and 10 would then point back to both point back to Chapter 5 of Title 21.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Whitfield. That's all I have.
Oh, okay, thanks. So just to clarify that with the chapters for Girdwood and Chugach Eagle River were not changed because they would refer to this section 2105 anyway?
Yes, Mr. Weddleton, Dave Whitfield again. I believe that is the case. And Michelle, you might chime in there if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the case.
I believe it is. I'm actually just flipping through my code right now to verify that.
Okay. So while you do that, any other comments from the committee?
John, I have a comment or
Sure.
maybe a question as well. So I really appreciate this simplification and this removal of the site plan process up to 50,000. I was wondering if there was thought about, we hear very often that it's extremely difficult and time consuming to build in this city. And was there thought of making 50,000 and above administrative site plan instead of conditional use?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, Dave Whitfield again. No, we hadn't given much thought to that. We feel like 50,000 cubic yards is an appropriate threshold. However, if the assembly wanted us to look at the possibility of making the 50,000 cubic yards the requirement for admin site plan review, we could certainly take a look at that and look at what potential impacts a development of that type would cause. But no, we did not consider making that an admin site plan review at this time.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that, Mr. Welton?
Sure, go ahead.
Just so I'm understanding, was it administrative site plan review before this, or are we just leaving an existing conditional use process in code that already existed?
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, Dave Whitfield again. The requirement for admin site plan review was any fill operation exceeding 5,000 cubic yards to 50,000 cubic yards. The requirement for conditional use was anything in excess of 50,000 cubic yards. So basically what we've done is eliminated the admin site plan review between 5,000 and 50,000 and kept the conditional use requirement for anything in excess of that.
Okay, I apologize. When I was reading the whereases, I for some reason I thought it sounded like we were adding a conditional use process, but it sounds like that already exists in code. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
This is Michelle McNulty. Through the chair, if I can just confirm on some information on the last question
Sure, please do.
regarding Girdwood and Eagle River. So yeah, as Dave stated, that was correct. They're not, that use is not specifically called out in those two tables, so in Girdwood and Eagle River. So by just changing the section, the 2105 section that we're changing, that addresses any issues in Girdwood and in Eagle River.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anything else from the committee? Okay. We do recommendations on marijuana. Do we do that on this or just let this go and move forward on Tuesday better informed?
You're welcome to do either.
Any thoughts from the committee?
I recommend approval.
Who was that?
Forrest.
Forrest,
I'll
any
happy to
second on?
Yeah, Constant.
I'm sorry, was that Chris?
Yes, I think there were two of us though.
Yeah, I was too, so it doesn't matter. It was seconded then, yeah.
Your call, Mandy. Any opposition? Okay. Actually, before we go, so Mr. Casson, are you on and would you like to speak? I think you hit *6 to unmute.
Yeah, this is Drew Kaysen with the Anchorage Home Builders Association, and I think that Michelle and Bob have done a great job of explaining the issue, and we are supportive of the change.
And identify who we are.
The Anchorage Home Builders Association.
All right, thank you. Okay, thanks. Is there anyone else waiting in the wings there to speak on this? And I apologize for not asking for the marijuana applications. Do you see anyone, Mandy?
I don't. If there's anybody that would like to, you can hit *6 to unmute yourself and then state your name.
Hearing silence, let's move on. Okay, so the next item is ordinance 2020-58 regarding the change in zoning for homeless and transient shelters. And we had a really good discussion yesterday at the homeless committee on this and brought up a number of points on that. So who's here from staff to speak on this?
This is Michelle McNulty, the planning director. I'm here to answer any questions or speak to this.
Okay. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, I'm watching chat, so if you want to speak, that's a good way to get in the queue.
Okay.
Committee members? Crystal, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a couple questions, but I want to start out with this one first. Kind of the same as the question last time. Does this also apply to Girdwood and Chugiak Eagle River? So would this be would this impact all B3, or would it just be the Anchorage Bowl area?
So through the chair, Ms. Kennedy, no, this is only for the Anchorage Bowl at this time. Girdwood is actually in the process of updating their Girdwood area plan update, which will likely result in code changes, and it can be addressed in that area at that time. And then also recognizing that this is a bigger conversation for the Eagle River Girdwood community, we would recognize that as being a separate change at a later time as well.
Great, thank you. And then another question I have, just in terms of the process, like Mr. Weddleton said, we talked a lot about this yesterday, and I just want to be clear on it as well. Just trying to figure out all the different hoops that people would have to jump through to put a homeless shelter in a B3 area with conditional use. what does that process look like in terms of what committees it has to go to, how much time it would take, how much public comment would be allowed versus going through the process of just asking for a variance for a homeless shelter in a B3 that would exist, that process that exists currently.
So through the chair, Ms. Kendi, I'm not sure what variance process you're referencing. So currently, homeless and transient shelters are prohibited in the B3 zoning district. The only zoning district that use is allowed is in the Public Lands and Institutions, PLI, through approval of a conditional use permit. So as a prohibited use, there is no process for any board or commission or even the assembly to approve something through a specific process. To answer your question about what the conditional use process looks like, it is typically if everything goes right and there's not a lot of controversy, the typical process is about 4 to 6 months. And what that process looks like, and that's from starting from when an applicant actually submits their application. So I'll kind of step back. So before an applicant even submitting an application for any conditional use permit, they are required to go to the affected community council. And if it straddles community council lines, they actually have to meet with both of those community councils. And as part of that, they have to provide notice 21 days in advance to anyone owning property and renting property within 500 feet of the subject project or the subject area. They have to attend the community council, provide notes and a write-up within 7 days, I believe it's 7 or 10 days of holding that meeting to the planning department, including copying the community council president. That way, if there's any discrepancies in the notes that have been taken, the community council knows what's been submitted to the planning department. And then the applicant has to hold a pre-application meeting which starts with the planning department. And we invite all necessary reviewing agencies and departments, so traffic, fire. In the case of a homeless shelter, it might be the health department and anyone that might have a vested interest. And the applicant presents what they want to move forward with, and then all those reviewing agencies and departments provide feedback on what they want to see addressed in their application. And then the applicant submits an application. Once it's been deemed finalized and we've received payment, we issue a case number and we upload it to the CityView system, which is our kind of electronic system. It gets routed to all those reviewing agencies that I've referenced that come to the pre-application meeting. And it also gets routed to the Federation of Community Councils and all the affected community councils so that they can see the application immediately and have a case number in which to provide public comment. They can provide that through the CityView portal. They can email the planner that's been assigned the case, and they can call the planner. And that public hearing, that public comment period lasts until the day they have their public hearing, until that public hearing is closed. The information is routed. We collect comments from everyone about 2 weeks prior to getting the final or the public hearing date. We do start to finalize our staff report. It's typically finalized within 1 week of the public hearing, but that's so any comments that have come in, either whether being from a reviewing agency or members of the public, they get put in that staff report. But we're still collecting comments, public comments, up until the public hearing. And then anyone who wants to testify, even if they provided written comments, can also come to the public hearing and provide public testimony at that time. And then once it's approved by the board or commission, in this case, it would be the Planning and Zoning Commission. The next meeting, they finalize a resolution, and that actually opens up a 21-day appeal period. So if anyone from the public believes that the process was flawed or otherwise the approval should not be upheld, they have a process to actually challenge that approval. And then the applicants on the responsible for resolving any conditions of approval associated with the approval of that conditional use permit prior to getting their building permits, and as part of that process.
All right, thank you. Crystal,
Okay,
follow up?
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks, Michelle. So that's okay. So then I was under the false assumption that there was a way to make an exception to a zoned district for a particular use that wasn't necessarily already allowed. So are you saying that there really, unless something's already allowed in a zoned area, there's no way to put something else in there other than what it was actually originally permitted?
So yes, if a use is prohibited, there is no other avenue to have a use that's otherwise prohibited permitted in a zoning district.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, John.
All right, thanks. Ms. Altel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is of particular interest to me. I've been working on this issue for a while beyond just the zoning change, particularly around concerns with the conditional use process. I know Ms. McNulty sent us the conditional use documents for Brother Francis Shelter, and I'd looked at those before and had some conversations about the enforcement of those conditions. And I'd had the conversation with Ms. McNulty, Mr. Whitfield, and Mr. Schutte previously, and I think maybe even Mr. Dole was there, I can't quite remember, about maybe a hybrid approach. It doesn't currently exist in code, but where if we were going to authorize shelters throughout the community in a broader way, which I fully support because it puts them on bus routes and closer to people and a lot of great things. But I understand the concerns. Is some kind of combined conditional use and special land use hybrid approach, so that we still had the expertise of planning and zoning involved. We still have the public process, but then it comes back before the body in a way that we can possibly reopen it or bring it back if we're running into issues. So I wanted to toss that out there for conversation, discussion, and questions, because I think what I gathered from the committee meeting yesterday is there's some concerns about making this change without maybe some other change, or making sure that it gets before the body should a potential shelter be going into B3. So I just wanted to toss that out there for conversation purposes.
Through the chair, may I?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so yes, Ms. Zolotel, we're definitely happy to explore that. That is an entirely new process, even looking at how we have the special land use permit for alcohol and marijuana licenses. This would be something different. We don't have anything quite like it in code. So we're happy to have that conversation. I just want to put out there that that is a significantly bigger change than what's before you today, and that's fine. But I would suggest that if we're going to pursue that conversation, we probably need to bring this back through the Planning and Zoning Commission and do the larger public outreach. So one of the reasons and justifications for this going directly to the assembly was that it was just making the change in the use table, allowing the one change, so allowing this in a new zoning district subject to a conditional use permit. But if we are creating a whole new process, that's a much larger change that probably does not warrant bypassing planning and zoning, and we would need to go back there. And I'm not saying that to sway your opinion about proceeding that way or not. Just wanted to everyone to know what this would result in.
May I follow up, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, please do.
Thanks. Thanks for that, Ms. McNulty. I really appreciate that. I guess I'd like to hear about an opinion or some thoughts about the efficacy of the conditional use process then with regard to shelters, because we've heard public feedback that it doesn't feel like it has enough teeth or that it's strong enough to require changes when there are neighborhood impacts. So if someone could speak to that, that would be some good information for me to have, considering what paths might exist moving forward.
Yeah, I think a lot of the feedback that we hear is about the existing shelters. I think one of the challenges is that because this is such a limited use, we don't have these in a lot of places, and so the few places that we have are being overwhelmed. That being said, I think we've also learned a lot about kind of enforcement and writing the conditions of approval on homeless and transient shelters, and making sure that as we write these conditions that they do have more teeth. So working with code enforcement to make sure that we're putting conditions that are both measurable and enforceable. There's several ways to do that. It can be through creating use-specific standards, adding additional requirements, maybe for reporting back to the Planning and Zoning Commission or otherwise to another reviewing body. Also, similar to what we do with like gravel extraction, they have they're subjected to a 5-year non-public hearing renewal requirement. So there could be options like that could be put in place that do give us a little more chance to check in with these operations on a more frequent basis, where there is an opportunity to either make changes through, additional conditions of approval and or providing the framework to revoke a conditional use permit that has teeth.
May I ask one last question, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. What's the fluidity or the ability under the current conditional use process? I know you keep mentioning the gravel extraction process, so it seems to be one that kind of sits outside of kind of our, I guess I'll call it normal or typical conditional use process, because I can see an operation or for actually a lot of conditional use things kind of changing over time, but it feels like a conditional use permit is rather static in nature. So I'd like to know a little bit more about, does it have any ability to be adaptable right now, or would that be something we'd have to look at in a change to code, or would that just be how maybe the conditions would be written?
It could be how the conditions are written. So that's how it is for the natural resource extraction. There's a lot of investment that goes into development. And so I think that's part of the reason why the conditional use permit is static, because people are getting that approval and they're investing a significant amount of money on the associated use. And typically it's going to be it just depends and like what the use is. But so we want them to be static, or we want people to know, hey, I've just invested millions of dollars into this building and I'm not going to get this yanked out of me. That being said, we do know that some uses are more intensive than other and have more prone to neighborhood impacts. And so it could definitely be a condition of approval now if we wanted to just keep moving forward. But it could also be something that we open up and change the use specific standards.
Thank you.
Chris, I've got you on the queue. I just want to follow up briefly on Michelle's point there. So were we to change the use specific standards, is that something that we could do under the ordinance in front of us? Through an amendment.
So I wouldn't suggest that because, I don't know if you're just changing it for B3 or if you would be including that change into the PLI. So is it going to, if it would be for both zoning districts, but that is a much larger kind of project scope than what we've kind of advertised this for. So I would feel that would go back to planning and zoning.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Is that
Chris
Schutte?
Mr. Chairman, this is Chris Schutte. I'd like to add a comment to Michelle's, if I may.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the interest in the committee on this point is really worth diving into. I just would like to echo Michelle's concerns about the vehicle through which we're able to do that, and would appreciate feedback from Assembly Council Our read of the title of the current ordinance in front of the assembly is that it's too narrow to go too much further outside of the intent of that ordinance. And so this could lead to the need for a future ordinance or ordinances to achieve some of the goals the assembly is discussing today, which I think is completely worthwhile discussing. I want to be upfront that I don't know that this ordinance is the vehicle through which we can do that, but would appreciate feedback from Assembly Council. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Let me go to Chris, who's been very patient, and then Dean, if you could craft a response during that time. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. Boy, there's so much to unpack here. If the title is the constraining variable, then screw it. Don't pass this thing and wait 2 weeks, one more meeting, to get the thing right, as opposed to running forward with an ordinance that grants a permanent use, an irrevocable use, because all the promises that will come up with conditions that are somehow manageable have not proven to work for at least 10 to 15 years. That's my reality that I face when I hear this conversation. And I want to support this because I believe in the cause, but I also don't want to see a package that comes forward that recreates the problems that we faced for the last 50 years. We should come up with solutions that actually fix the problem, which in my opinion are solutions that provide the people's representatives a voice in the process and not just a body of bureaucrats appointed by the body of the people's representatives. And so we have to figure this out if this item is to pass. Now, going back to Ms. Kennedy's comment that the variance may or may not work. It doesn't work in this case, that there's no way for the use to be permitted. Well, that's not exactly true. We have seen that an emergency use can be granted in a temporary way. And those temporary emergency uses seem to become permanent one way or the other. And so it's not accurate to say that there's no way to have this use be permitted. It's just permitted on an emergency basis. We see that with the Hope Center. And so it can be done. I'm not certain I agree that if we were to go at it the way that we're contemplating, which is to put some level of assembly review into this, that it has to go to PZC. I would like Dean to respond in that. We created Planning and Zoning Commission. These are our decisions in the end. And so not sure that I agree, but it's certainly worthy of a conversation. And for me to support this, we have to do two things. We have to have a method for the assembly to have a say, and we have to have a cabining process around the conditional use that it can be rationally passing the red face test, believed that it could be revoked because past performance shows us that that is not the case. And so with both of those caveats put onto this conversation, I'll reiterate, I do want to see this pass. And I have asked Dean to provide some legal advice on how to proceed to get those items in there. And he cautioned that we can't just do it in relationship to homeless services, homeless shelters, because then, you know, fair housing and other issues might come into play that we've already seen in the past with severe alcohol dependent housing ordinance that was found to be illegal. We can't just target one population. We have to think a little more broadly. And so with all of that together, I'm hoping we can find a way and not just say, oh, we have to do this because the title says it. Well, we can wait 2 weeks, or we can't come up with a workaround because it has to go to planning and zoning. We have to figure this out before we move forward. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. Meg, you wanted back in?
I can wait if Dean's ready. I can wait
Okay,
for that
Dean.
first.
Okay. Dean, can you address some of those points or all of them?
I guess I would try. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that a lot of what Ms. McNulty and Mr. Schutte said makes good sense. I do think that we have a sort of sense of urgency to get this in place because of the COVID-19 pandemic and sort of the new spacing requirements that we're going to have for homeless transit shelters going forward. And we need, I think, more shelters sooner rather than later. So this is, I think, a rather quick fix, but we have a lot of concerns, of course. My thought is that, like Ms. Salato said, we do need more use-specific standards and maybe a change in process. And those things can happen, I think, later with another ordinance. One concern I had is that there's no currently in Title 21, 540C 5 for homeless and transit shelters. There's definition. There's no use-specific standards. And I think that we do need some here, especially if we're going to have B3 districts allowed to have homeless transit shelters. They're adjacent to residential districts. We should have standards for that situation and so forth that you see in some other uses throughout the code. But I do see concern with rushing through use-specific standards, and it should be carefully done. So generally, I think that if this ordinance is passed as is, we would be very careful about the conditional use process and what conditions are added to it. And those conditions added to whatever application comes forward here could probably become sort of a model for what we put in an ordinance for use-specific standards later. So that's one way to go. And a second thought, another way to go is I do see this ordinance is set for public hearing July 14th. So there is a bit of time to substantially modify this and publish an S version that includes use-specific standards added to this ordinance and still comply with the notice requirements for July 14th, as long as we get it on an S version on the regular agenda in July, by July 3rd, July 2nd. Still, that's a tight time frame to get that kind of work done. And let's see. Because of the urgency, I understand waiving planning and zoning commission review at this time, but the planning and zoning commission, because they are basically the decision-making body for the conditional use permits, should have some input on this. Maybe it can be after the fact, but we might have applications before they get their input in for later ordinance, as I mentioned earlier. So those are some of the initial thoughts I had on this ordinance and what it's lacking and what we could do to perhaps improve it before it comes before a vote on July 14th. And I hope that makes sense. So secondly, there were a lot of concerns, I think. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Constant mentioned Fair Housing Act concerns and issues we had previously with severe alcohol dependent housing. I don't think that we have those issues here with this type of use, homeless and transit shelters, at least those legal and potential litigation issues, mostly because alcoholism is considered a disability under the Fair Housing Act and the American Disabilities Act. But we have homeless and transient shelters for people that need housing. So we don't have that same kind of protected class that's being treated differently or being singled out for specific housing arrangements and zoning regs. It's not a protected class, homeless and transit, or homeless individuals experiencing homelessness. So there's this distinction between what we had in terms of those Fair Housing Act issues in the past. Let me see. Well, there are a couple other points that I missed addressing.
Let me, Meg, I see you in the queue, but can I jump to Chris to follow up on that? And Chris, if he didn't address some of your points, why don't you go ahead and relist?
Thank you. Dean, in a communication we had, you suggested that we can't just do these changes targeting this use. Why was it your suggestion then that we could not do that specific to this use only if not for the case of some legal restriction?
I'm not quite clear. I think in our communication we had talked about the ability to revoke the conditional use if it had too many negative impacts on the neighborhood. So I'm not recalling exactly what our communication was. I would need to review that.
What we talked about was changing this ordinance to require a stop at the assembly for final review and putting on conditions or basic frameworks around conditions so that we can feel confident. In both cases, we will see it and the conditions will have some meaning. What was suggested back was we can't just do this for this use. Because if you're saying we can, then we should.
Oh, yes. We were speaking, I think, I was speaking specifically to the conditional use process and the way it's set up, the way Title 21 is structured. There's the conditional use process, which applies to all those different specific use types that require a conditional use process. And conditional use is public notice, the planning zoning commission review, and then if it's denied and there's an appeal, it goes to the Board of Adjustment. So the Assembly doesn't have a role in decision making with the appeal for the conditional use process. And what I think I understood is that the Assembly still wants to have some sort of involvement or oversight or appellate oversight role for homeless and transit shelters. So I think that to make that special and unique for homeless and transit shelters, that would be similar to a special land use permit. And I think that Meg had a conversation that she mentioned earlier that she was looking at some hybrid approach. So what I told you, Chris, that we can't do it just for this use, I think I mean if we just stick with the standard conditional use process, but try to inject the Assembly at some point just for homeless transit shelters. However, maybe I would like to learn more about the hybrid process that Ms. Salatal, Ms. Minotti, Mr. Dole have discussed, and maybe discuss more about how we could change for homeless and transit shelters, especially land use permit process. That seems a little more extensive, but it would make the Assembly the decision-making body. So I think that there may be also, since Ms. McNulty, since talking with her, that there may be some sort of periodic reporting process, and perhaps that reporting could include a report to the Assembly, so the Assembly is aware, and by receiving reports about issues and so forth, even if the Assembly is not involved in the conditional use process, we are able to see what's happening, and if there's significant issues that we reoccur, to make changes to the use-specific provisions, which we don't have yet, but we might have soon, to address or ameliorate those. I think the concern I have, though, is that that wouldn't apply to permits already approved. It would apply prospectively to new applications after we fix problems. So, but I think that Ms. McNulty addressed that in terms of having an annual reporting process similar to gravel extraction and so forth. And I didn't get to read the sections on that use yet, but I would like to. So I guess I would backpedal a little bit about saying we can't do it, Chris, to saying that we maybe need to figure it out. It's maybe possible, but I need to study this a little more.
All right, so just to put a cap on that, any reliance on reports as a vehicle to us don't provide any confidence. When we just received a stack of reports over some 10 or 12-year process for the current shelter provider, and yet the only reason things change is because we literally moved everybody out of that area. And so if we're going to rely on an annual report to give us some form of confidence that these operations are going to operate in a way that is not destructive to a neighborhood, let alone not harmful, but destructive, then we have to come up with a better process, and a process that involves the people's representatives.
Right, thanks, Chris. If I could, I know Meg, you're in the queue and we're short on time, but Chris, you had mentioned yesterday and kind of jogged my memory, but with the tank farm at the port, you said that the conditional use, that the assembly had some role in that. So we did something there. You or Dean?
Yeah, if I can, I hope Michelle, she said she would have some information on this. I think we actually just added 2 words, with review. And those 2 words establish that if the tank farm process goes through the planning and zoning, makes a decision, the assembly has the ability to review. I could be misremembering, but that was the very first action that I took on this body. And so I just have a clear memory that we inserted ourselves into the conditional use process for tank farms within 1,000 feet of neighborhoods.
Okay. So that's something to follow up on then. So, okay. Meg, would you like to go?
Through the chair, this is Michelle McNulty. Can I address Christopher Constance?
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Thanks.
So I did actually look into that yesterday after our meeting, Christopher, and so that language was not adopted. My understanding is it was suggested, but that is not what got adopted. It does require that they have to update the community council if there's any changes, but there was no requirement that that CUP go through review of the assembly.
Okay.
I guess I will have to go back through and look at the record and figure that out. It certainly isn't what I remember. And if it isn't, I mean, I have another ordinance conversation going on that will require any kind of major institutional change to come before the body, because it's not okay that a small subset of bureaucrats make these decisions and then it's forever written because the offender has to agree to the change. Why in the hell would they agree to a change when it's them causing the harm? They can't mitigate it because it's not their problem. It's offside of their property. And so then it becomes a stalemate, and that stalemate destroys neighborhoods.
Okay. Thank you. So go ahead, Meg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to say, after this discussion, I'm not comfortable enough now with the idea of just conditional use for shelters. And I haven't been, but, and I think I don't want to rush this process. I'd actually like to see this taken up in much more depth, regardless if this is set for the hearing on the 14th, and do something much more comprehensive. Should we run into a problem with shelter capacity or the need to close down Sullivan, there is the emergency ordinance. It could be used, but I will caveat that statement with saying it should be used on an emergency basis until we come up with an actual solution that's comprehensive. I'm not okay relying on it forever. I have real heartburn about that. But yeah, at this point, I would really like, I don't know if we could put some heads together to really dig into this, but it seems like we have a need, we've identified it, we've identified a potential solution, but I don't think we've identified the full solution in terms of a process that assures us that we're not going to repeat past problems. So I've volunteered to help, but I'd really like us to slow down.
Okay, good. Thank you. Chris, you have a follow-up for Dean on, can you reiterate what issue?
We already addressed that.
Oh, you did. Okay. Mr. Gates, go ahead.
Sorry, I was looking at the emergency chapter for civil emergency, and 38110 is the exemptions from zoning regulations during period of emergency. When I read that language, though, it talks about allowing temporary structures for shelter or housing and not permanent ones. And I don't think we're talking about like temporary structures, tents, mobile homes, and so forth here. So it's a little interesting, but I would hope that we don't need to rely on that to get this done. But anyways, I think that we're better off trying to, well, I would study that some more because we have made some zoning exemptions for the use at the Sullivan. I suppose we do similarly for shelters that come up during this pandemic as we close the Sullivan. But what Ms. Zalatow said makes sense. And I think that to me, what makes some sense is getting something in place soon and getting a larger change in place later. But I think that we really want to preserve the ability to add or modify conditions or use specific standards for current uses at the time to address, I guess, inadequate mitigation of the negative impacts that there might be on neighboring properties. So there's some that we can't foresee, I think.
All right, thank you. Meg, can I jump to, I'd like to jump to Austin because she hasn't spoken yet.
Sure.
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks, John. I'll be quick. I was just going to bring up that Meg and I and you too, John, I know have been talking with Jason and Chris about, or Robin about this. And Jason just suggested that we meet at 10 a.m. on Monday to talk in more detail, and we can invite Dean too. So in terms of possibilities for next steps, that could be part of it.
Yeah, I think that's good. And we've got a list of points from the different assembly members to kind of address. So I guess we could work that out later, but that time works fine for me. Thanks. Is that all, Austin?
Yeah, I just
Okay.
wanted folks to know there
Thank
was a
you.
plan to follow up.
Okay, Meg?
Thank you. Yeah, for that follow-up perhaps, but at that point about the emergency shelter ordinance that Dean made about it being temporary structures, I don't think that's correct, because what we had done was replaced a prior ordinance with the current one. Because if it was temporary structures only, then somebody like an operation like the downtown or the Hope Downtown Centers, the soup kitchen down there couldn't be doing shelter. So I guess we need to really be clear on what we can do under the emergency provisions beyond. I don't know if we're talking just about the emergency order because of COVID, or if we're talking about the other ordinance, which we gave the health department that authority. So we need to be really clear on what the intersection of all the different authorities are and exactly what they do. And if we've got enough ability to be flexible now while we take our time with a larger solution. So I just wanted to raise that point. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have a little more time, but I think what we're hearing is this is complicated and important. And we'd like to, it sounds like, I guess the sponsors of this could meet at Monday morning. Mr. Constant is certainly an important piece of all this with his close familiarity with current shelter. So if we have 4 of us, we'll have to announce it as a meeting, which is fine with me. Is that something that people are okay with? And I think we have time if we set something up now to announce it. Would that work, Mandy?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. And we have tentatively 10 a.m. Monday, but is that, can you confirm all that, Mandy, at some point after the meeting today?
Yeah,
Go
Dean,
Dean.
go ahead.
So the Monday meeting we were talking about, I'm talking about a special committee meeting. I was under the impression it was 3 assembly members and Jason Blackenstedt, Ms. McDulty and others. So it wouldn't need to be an open meeting. We're under the threshold for that.
Dean, I think that's correct, but I would want to make room for Chris Constant in this at any stage. And that bumps us up to 4.
Oh.
Well, and John, this is
I'm
often
sorry.
Chris and I are
I was counting wrong then.
about how to involve him, and I'm happy to step out if that makes sense. So we might be able to figure it out. And And then maybe we can just notice it if we decide to do 4, but maybe we'll just try to stick with 3. Whether it's me or Chris, I'm happy to step aside if that makes sense.
Actually,
Dean, go ahead.
If I may. Well, Mr. Honest said it's no problem to notice it. We could keep it at an open meeting and just provide notice, time and place.
Would you call that a CEDC meeting on Monday morning then?
For a subcommittee.
Well, I sort of saw it as, I don't know what you would call it, actually. I thought it was the ordinance sponsors plus a couple other assembly members, so totaling 4 just to talk about the ordinance. I don't know if you would call it a subcommittee. You could if you want. May as well.
Well, I mean, at any rate, is there a quorum issue if we call it a subcommittee or if we just call it an additional CEDC meeting? Would we shut down from conversation if we don't have a quorum? I'd certainly invite everyone.
That is a good question. I think that might be something Dean can answer. If it's a subcommittee, I don't know.
Dean?
Yes, if it's a subcommittee, then well, we should have a quorum, and that would be out of 4 members, 3 of them. So it doesn't sound like that would be a problem. I recommend not having it a CEDC meeting because then you have all the other members that are on this committee to account for. So a subcommittee, and with 3 of them showing up, that would be okay.
Or can we have, but if we announce a subcommittee meeting, we can have more than 3. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd recommend, Mandy, that you set up a subcommittee meeting for the CEDC on this issue, or maybe just a subcommittee on this ordinance for Monday, looking at 10 o'clock. And I suppose a Teams meeting like we are now for where public would have access.
Okay.
Any comments on that from the committee? Okay, well, good. I think that's
if I might, John, one last comment. I really do want to see this successfully pass, right? And so it might sound like I'm working against it, but that's not the case. I'm working to
I don't get that impression. This is very important, and we need to do it quickly, do it right. So this is good. Okay, so we've got about 4 more minutes, and we have kind of our standard things here. Budget list presented at the Rules Committee, which I think we've seen a couple times now, which I put together, Crystal reviewed. So I don't think we have time for that. Any issues on that from the committee? Hearing none, we will skip that item. I'd like to move then to audience participation. Mandy, is there anyone out there who wishes to speak?
If you are on the phones and you would like to speak, you can hit *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, hearing no one.
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, we have someone.
Can you
Yeah,
hear?
please identify yourself.
This is Mike Bowman, just a resident, live in College Village. Been listening,
Okay.
getting up to speed on the issue.
Okay, Mr. Bowman, would you typically have 3 minutes? We're running short. I think we have about that much time, but if you have some comments, go ahead.
I do, and I won't even take that much time. I'm glad to see that we're stepping back a little bit and regrouping on this ordinance. But I have some issues with it. A lot of them were discussed. I don't have the benefit of what you talked about yesterday, but I'm happy to see what you're doing today. So thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
there is a recording
May
of
I
yes.
add as well? I'm John Finley. I live in Geneva Woods, and I've kind of been concerned because this has sort of seemed to lack clarity or transparency as to would be occurring if this new ordinance is passed. And also it was sort of a lacking of information about the fact that the city was purchasing the Golden Line, and lack of any transparency as to whether or not it actually would be a rehabilitation center. So those are my concerns, is kind of a feeling that there may be a lack of input and a lack of transparency about the process. Thanks for accepting my call.
All right, thanks for being here. Mr. Bowman, were you through with your comments?
Yes, I was. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Star 6. Okay, I don't hear anyone else. Would we like to adjourn?
Move to adjourn. I don't know if you
We
heard
need a
me.
second.
I said
we're
move to-
adjourned.
No, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.